Arzy, first off, it's nice to see you again.
You mean from that brief conversation in
Yeah.
my driveway on Sunday morning?
Somebody
Listen,
texted me and says, I hope you and Farwell haven't left. I said, well, I got to his house and luckily I didn't pick up our coffees before picking you up. But yeah, it was quite the Sunday afternoon / early morning, late morning, I guess, when pulling into your driveway, when I see you walking out. Normally, I'm the one who shows up to games and to car rides wearing probably a toque, maybe my suit jacket, some dress shoes, and maybe some gloves. You're a little smarter. You show up the big winter coat, the winter boots, a hat, mitts. You're going to be warm no matter what. I'm rolling the dice. And I see you walking out of your house, no jacket, no toque. I think you had running shoes on. And I thought, that doesn't look like Farwell's ready to go to Windsor right now.
okay, let's take this back half a step, though, since you brought it up, because you remember when this reputation of yours started and is well earned, right? Trip to the Sioux. It was one of our first trips together. And you went to the Sioux, and I know it was March, but it's still the Sioux. And you went up there without a winter jacket.
Yeah.
And I remember we get to the hotel, and I'm like, what? Dude, you're like, the rink's just across the street. I said, I don't care if the rink's you're in Sault Ste. Marie right now, but you're like, whatever. But boy, oh boy, that was quite the walk, because what you do in the Sioux, if you don't know, now you're going to know. The hotel is essentially across the street from the arena, but it's a good hike. There's, what would you say, 700-800 meters? It's not a kilometer. Anyway.
Yeah, probably. Maybe
there's
500, but yeah.
You walk out the hotel parking lot, cross the street, you're into the parking lot of the mall, the station.
It's two
mall.
City blocks, essentially. Two city blocks.
But what you do when you know what to do is you cut through the mall to save yourself some steps outdoors, because it can be brisk. And then you pop out the doors of the mall that give you the best direct line to the arena, and you make a beeline for it. And there we were. Well, I was dressed for the weather. You not quite.
No, I wasn't. I'm just really glad, though, that I smartened up, because if you remember, that wasn't the coldest walk we had to make that weekend. Remember the one that was so bad? We took a picture of you next to the snowbanks on the side of the road, and my beard froze in the time it took me to walk from the hotel to the rink. Like, it was actually frozen. Yeah, that time I definitely had a toque. I remember I had it like right down here, and I think I had like a scarf that I wrapped up to like the bridge of my nose that just my eyes were showing, and I still hated my life. But yeah, I learned my lesson pretty quickly about my jacket. But anyway, when I saw you walking out of the house, I thought either Farwell's losing it, he was robbed, and someone stole all his winter clothes, or we don't have a game today.
This tangent brought to you by David Schooley, award-winning broker at Remax Twin City. You see, when you're going to move, you want to get things right. And there's a lot of stuff that you got to get right when it's time to move. So what you need to do is just call David Schooley, 519-577-1212. Text him at that number. Once you're working with him, he'll be with you every step of the way. And as difficult as it can be, he's been there, he's done it, and he'll help you do it too. 519-577-1212, online, goinghome.ca. David Schooley will help your next move be the easiest move you've ever made.
Did he write that for you?
What do you mean? I just did that. That's how we do it on this podcast, Pope.
I wrote the first one.
I could tell. You're not going to write them all. You'll get there. Why would you write them? You work them in. It's part of the conversation.
Well, it's a 30-second ad read.
Yeah, no. Not
30-second ad read. Speaking of, if you want your business to be on this podcast for a 30-second ad read, and we'll probably give you more and mention it a few times because we're nice people, let us know, farwellandpope@gmail.com. Hit us up on the Twitters at @Farwell_OHL or @_Chris Pope.
What I would like
your business is right here.
What I want to know now is which way you would prefer to have it done. The way Chris read it last time, or the way I'm not going to promise what I just did was 30 seconds. It was probably 30-ish. I might have been. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I think you should pick Chris's, because then he has to actually write it first, which makes him do more work, which is awesome because the guy is a slacker. But
if they want to purchase airtime on this very podcast, they can write whatever they want too. If they want us to say something certain, if they're promoting an event or if they just want a proper commercial, or you can leave it up to us two idiots.
Just give us some talking points.
Yeah, like totally up to you. Totally up to you. But if whatever you want, we'll do it. And you know what? We're kind of like Ron Burgundy. So if you're going to write something, we'll read it. So if you just don't like your ex-girlfriend and you want to put a 30-second.
No, see, no, I was just going to say, you said whatever you want. That's not how this is going to be. We're going to have standards on this. Believe it or not, there are standards.
36 years of never having standards. I ain't starting now.
Anyway, to the story that began all of this before the tangents, and farwellandpope@gmail.com. Get your business mentioned right here, just like this. Sunday morning, we're getting ready. And so I'm not going to lie, I was not moving as well. I didn't have a bad Saturday night or anything. It's just it's Sunday morning. So my significantly better half saying, 10:45. And I'm in the back room getting my tie on. And I'm like, don't worry, it's Pope. He's at least 5 minutes late all the time. So I finished tying up, come out to the living room, and she's like, he's here. I'm like, holy crap, he's like right on time. Which, admit it, Popey, that's rare. That's
36, new year, new me, baby.
I dig it. So I'm like, okay. I mean, I'm ready. I just have to throw on my winter stuff and come outside. I had everything, the gear, my hockey bag, everything's at the door. Oh, just grab my phone off the charger. And it's good. Like it couldn't have happened any better because I never have my phone like that. It doesn't ring. It's always on silent. And as I'm taking my phone off the charger, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Hello? Farwell, have you left yet? I'm like, Pope just pulled in the driveway. Don't leave. I'm like, okay. And so I get the word. And so you're waiting, probably wondering why I'm late. And about 3 minutes later, I walk out of the house just the way you described me. I'm like, yeah, we're not going to Windsor today. So the funny thing about this, I think I've got this right. So try to follow the bouncing ball. The Rangers originally had a game scheduled for Tuesday, January the 25th versus Sarnia, which was postponed. And I believe, don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure that game on Tuesday the 25th was postponed so the Rangers could play on Saturday the 22nd in Flint. The thinking being it's easier to reschedule a game in Sarnia than it is a game in Flint. And then the Rangers were playing 3-3 for the weekend. The Saturday game in Flint added back onto the schedule to make up for a previous miss. Tuesday's taken off because 3-3 is enough. 4-5 is probably too much. And then they don't end up playing 3-3 anyway because the Sunday game in Windsor gets postponed. Either way, it's just another, I know, try to follow the bouncing puck.
You
right?
confused me. I feel bad for our casual listeners after because I'm like, sure.
I think the Saturday game was a reschedule and the Tuesday game was removed to make room for the reschedule. And then they could have just done the original schedule. Anyway, Popey, there are not enough days left before April the 3rd, the final day of the season. I love that we're soldiering through. I feel bad for whoever is making the schedule, but there just aren't enough days left. Too many games, not enough days.
I'm with you, and I apologize for just blanking out on when these games were scheduled because I was saying to my girlfriend Kate earlier, I'm like, I don't even know when I'm working next. Like, she's like, what's going on this weekend? I'm like, I don't know yet. Games might be canceled. Games might be rescheduled. I just look in my phone every morning in my calendar app, and that's what I'm doing today. But as for what you said, it's going to be tough for sure. And as much of a scatterbrains as it is trying to figure out when these games all are, I feel bad for Herbie at the league office who does all the scheduling because I don't even want to know what his nights are like. Like, he must not sleep at all. It must just be like, I'm picturing like Zach Galifianakis in The Hangover when he's at the poker table and all the numbers are running through his brain. Like, that must just be Herbie when he tries to sleep, just living in the matrix nonstop in his own brain, trying to figure out how he's going to maneuver all these games and who's going to host who and how many games you can get in and travel and border crossings and COVID protocol. No, thank you. But as you mentioned, it is getting extremely tight for this league to get all 68 games in for all 20 teams.
One of the things that I've heard a little bit about that I would like to try to put a stop to right now is any notion whatsoever that the Memorial Cup is somehow a moving target. It's not. Okay. St. John is hosting. It's going to happen in June. it is set. You can't start even in January toying with the Memorial Cup 5 months from now, because there's just too much that the host city does to prepare to be the host city. So if I can bring to an end any of the little bit of scuttlebutt around that, I would like to right now. And then further to that, I do wonder, like, I started thinking, you play a 3 out of 5 in the first round of the playoffs to make up for a little bit of time, because one way or another, you're going to have to make up some time. And then you start thinking, though, about how much the playoff revenue means to each team. And you're like, okay, so maybe the playoff revenue stays, and you start lopping games off the end of the 68 game schedule, which is where I think the league will land. You can be sure they're talking about this. I don't know if they have a magic number of games that need to be rescheduled before they just say, okay, it's time to start cutting games off. But if they do have that magic number and we haven't reached it yet, we've got to be awfully close. But I would think it's coming off the regular season, not the playoffs. You're definitely not moving the Memorial Cup.
Yeah, I don't think you're moving the Memorial Cup at all. Just when you base it on hotels, the amount of people that are going into St. John that are going to be needing a hotel, just the logistics of. So let's say, for instance, you're going to move it to you said it's June, right?
Yeah.
Memorial Cup. Let's say you're going to move it to July. Well, those hotels probably are booked in July. So I can't even imagine the logistics and all the volunteers you have set aside, the ice time that you have set aside, everything involved, all the businesses planning for this time of the Memorial Cup. I can't envision them moving it at all. And when it comes to playoff revenue, that's a non-starter in my mind for the 20 governors at the league meeting. I can't imagine that they're going to vote in favor of cutting playoff games and punishing those teams that actually make the playoffs. But now, when you were talking about that and you're talking about lopping games off of the regular season, I have no problem with that. But are you going to convince the 4 teams that missed the playoffs that, hey, you're not only not getting playoff revenue, but you're also losing 5 home games and losing that revenue?
Yeah, it's well, and I'll tell you when you're not going to convince them of that right now, when they're playing in front of 0 fans, and we're still a week away. By the time this podcast is out, we're moving into the week where you'll be able to have 500 fans, but we're still 2 weeks or so away from 50% capacity again. Like, goodness gracious.
Well, and this hurts certain teams more. Like, we were looking at the schedule, and I know this podcast is extremely Ranger based, but you talked about it. Rangers have basically played twice as many games at home this season as they have on the road. Basically, since Christmas, it's been all at home and no revenue from those home games. So all these teams that are playing a lot of home games right now with fans not in the stands, you're losing out on home ice advantage, but you're also losing out on your gate. 500 people or not, who cares? It's a bottom line that's going to help you. So with this, the no fans in the stands, it's certainly hurting more teams or certain teams more. And then you're going to tell them that, hey, you're going to lose 5 to 10 home games. I'm glad I'm not in their position. I'll say that.
Yeah, it's not easy. I would expect an announcement in the not too distant future that something is going to happen around the schedule in the league, just because you got to do something. And when you mentioned that discrepancy in home games versus road games for the Rangers, it made me think of the team the Rangers just played this past weekend in Michigan, and that was the Flint Firebirds. Just real quick on them. They had just finished an 8-game road trip. Now, Christmas was in the midst of that too, but they were 8 straight on the road. That Firebirds team, and Ted Dent especially, is a pretty nice story. This is kind of like, second chances for Ted Dent. If you don't know the entire history of the now head coach of the Flint Firebirds, starts out in coaching as the video coach of the Washington Capitals 20 odd years ago now, really makes his mark with Rockford in the American Hockey League, the Ice Hogs, the affiliate of the Chicago Blackhawks, part of 3 championships. 3 Stanley Cup championships. Guy's got 3 rings. And then the famous tweet and delete. Have you ever tweeted and deleted, Popey?
I have, yes. And if I'm just thinking about it, because I just want to make sure I'm accurate. Like, I've definitely tweeted and deleted because I didn't tag the right person, or I didn't, didn't spell a word correctly. That drives me crazy if I can notice it.
Yeah.
But to delete it because I changed my opinion, maybe once, maybe twice, when I thought, yeah, that's pushing it. that might be crossing the line. I don't want to, but I can't imagine it was anything crazy. I tend to overthink things, as you know.
Yeah.
So it was probably just something like that, or a spelling mistake.
Well, Dent obviously regretted what he had tweeted when there were some roster shakeups in Rockford, and he didn't really agree with the direction the club was headed. So he vocalized that on social media. And of course, if it's up for 5 minutes, it's up for 4 minutes too long, because somebody's going to screenshot something. And then, of course, he even tells the players, "Yeah, problem with this, go talk to Stan Bowman, the general manager in Chicago." And next thing you know, he's out of a job. Picks back up again as an assistant with the Niagara Ice Dogs. And now he has got that Flint team going like a buzzsaw currently. And listen, I think it's a nice story all around, as, like I said, you kind of get second chances for the head coach, and this team is flying high right now.
They are, and it's a weird one to me, because they were flying high for the last 3 years with Eric Wellwood in charge. And then he and Barclay Branch leave, and then Ted comes in, and I'm blanking on the Terry general manager, Terry
Christensen.
Maybe. I apologize. But he comes in place of Barclay Branch. So Terry was there before, when all the bad stuff was happening in Flint.
Yeah.
So I was just kind of taken aback that Eric Wellwood would walk away from a job like that, especially at a young age. Obviously landed on his feet in the pro ranks, but still, I was a little taken aback. But that Flint hockey team, it doesn't surprise me. I know that a lot of people at the start of the year maybe had him written off, but they had Luke Kavelin, one of the veteran goaltenders in this league, Southpaw. And anytime you have Brennan Othman on that team, I mean, he's going to put up a couple goals, that's for sure. And I just love to see it, because I've talked on this podcast and on our broadcast numerous times about how much I just love that building, because you walk in and you can smell the butter from the popcorn from the 70s in there. Like, it just,
it's like Slapshot. It's 100% like Slapshot. Yeah.
And I've talked about it, but I just love how the opposing team has to take this dark and scary walk around the bowels of the arena to get to the room, and it just looks dirty. Like you're like, where are we? Are in the basement of an arena right now. And I love that, because it's so intimidating. And then you go down the ice and fans right on top of you. They did a lot of renovations and stuff, and I'm glad that they turned that franchise around, because I personally love that franchise.
On the opposite end of the fan experience or game experience spectrum from Flint, well, come on, it is what it is, right?
Great segue.
Thank you. Of course, now I'm talking about Mississauga. And by the way, for these kinds of conversations, because Popey and I just talked about it on our pregame show for one of our broadcasts this past weekend, follow the OHL Stories YouTube page. So Popey will do his coffee reviews. I do a weekly rant called Fridays with Farwell. And we got to figure out a way to capture. I'm just worried about the audio. We're going to figure it out, though. Yeah. We're going to do it. We just hope the audio is clean enough, right? Anyway, but because when we do our pregame show, obviously we're broadcasters for the Rangers, but we look at a story from Kitchener Rangers, the team they're playing, and then a story in the league. So hopefully we're giving you, if you're in a market that doesn't have a pregame show, but you're getting set for the game, you can find City News 570 on the Radio Player Canada app, or on the old interwebs. Ask your smart speaker to play it. Maybe you want to hear. We're going to get it up on the YouTube page too. OHL Stories on YouTube. But we talked on our pregame show this past weekend, and we talked about why nobody seemed to be talking about, or maybe it's just us, the Mississauga Steelheads. Now, I think we might have jinxed them a little bit, because they had a bit of a cooled off kind of weekend. But still, as we record this episode, they're 5 points clear of the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds, and 7 of both Kingston and London for the overall lead in the Ontario Hockey League. And I was pumping Hamilton's tires, and I still maintain it's the Bulldogs that are the team to beat, not just in the East, but in the O this season. But Mississauga, shake your head all you want, Chris. Mississauga is playing lights out hockey, still single-digit losses halfway through the season.
It's crazy. I'm just shaking your head that you're already crowning Hamilton a champion, and don't even put some respect on Dale and Mark's name. You know what I mean? Like, how? Come on. Really?
Listen, have you ever heard of too much of a good thing? It's too much of a good thing. I mean, sorry, London, you got a good thing. It's too much. Stop it. Enough already. Go.
What do you mean?
So I'm just saying, because saying London is going to win the OHL championship is easy. It's like saying Tom Brady's going to win the MVP. It's just too easy.
Gotcha.
I like to do things the hard way. So Hamilton,
gotcha.
OHL champions this year. What?
Listen, and they very well could be.
They could. So could London. So could Mississauga.
Very easily. So could Guelph. So could a lot of teams. And welcome to the COVID year. But yeah, it's a team that I guess my question is, why is no one talking about them?
Well, because they're in Mississauga.
Yeah, yes. They don't get the media coverage that they maybe need. But yeah, it's crazy. They didn't make a lot of moves at the deadline. They didn't make that big of a splash. I think it was Uberti that they got from Niagara. But Luca Del Bel is having an unbelievable season, 47 points in 35 games. He was ranked 11th in the last North American Central Scouting draft list. I retweeted our buddy Matt Cullen this past weekend because he covers the Steelheads, and he was giving Del Bel Blues all of his props, and rightfully so after that many points. But Owen Beck, a rookie, leading all rookies in scoring, and they're getting the goaltending. James Richmond has them playing obviously good team defense, I would assume. We don't see their games. But when you have two goalies that are at the top of the league in goals against average, that probably means that you're playing the right way. That's for sure, and giving them some help. So I just think they need to get some props, because when you're that clear, like all the talk around, at least us anyway, with only seeing Western Conference games this year, has been London, Guelph, the Sioux, and rightfully so. And then you look at the standings and you're thinking, oh, Hamilton made all those moves. Oh, what's Adam Dennis doing up in North Bay? Anybody watching Mississauga right now? Normally not, but is anybody watching them, at least in the standings? Because they're, as you mentioned, 5 games ahead of the Sioux right now, 7 ahead of London. So whatever James Richmond is doing while doing both duties, general manager and head coach, tip of the hat for sure.
The other interesting thing, and I confess to not looking at this in the past, so I never know. I don't know what it's looked like historically, but there's definitely a general consensus that West is best in the Ontario Hockey League. The Eastern Conference has been trying to kind of make itself more like the Western Conference, because we consistently see Western Conference teams, the 2018 Hamilton Bulldogs notwithstanding, but Western Conference teams end up being OHL champions. In fact, before that 18 Mississauga team, it was the 18 Hamilton team was the 15 Oshawa team, and then the 06 Peterborough team. And that's it for this century. Or did Ottawa squeak in 2000, 2001? Something. So maybe there were 4.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Because that might have been 99. I'm just going off the top of my head here. Bottom line is West seemed to be the dominant conference. You want an OHL champion, it's coming out of the West. You look at the standings right now, and I'm going to keep a closer eye on this now forever moving forward. But top 10 teams in the Ontario Hockey League, it's a split 5-5 between the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference. And I'm not certain that's always the case. You got Mississauga followed by Sioux and London. Kingston's in there. Barrie and Oshawa are in there on the eastern side. So North Bay, you already mentioned them, along with your Guelphs, your Sioux, etc. From Windsor in there from the West. So it's interesting to see top 10 are split evenly between West and East. Is West best this year? I don't know. Does East look better? And is Mississauga piling up points because they're playing Eastern Conference teams all the time? I don't know, but it's interesting to look at.
And I don't think that's fair to say anymore, just because both conferences really have 4 teams, right? That are, let's say 5 teams that are really contending. So they're going to have to face those East teams. And I haven't broken down the schedule, but it would be interesting to see what's their division like, because those teams in their division will be, you're going to play them more often, right? And if your division is rebuilding, but you're going for it, then your numbers are going to be inflated.
Yeah.
You know, like we broke down the schedule at the game the other day, just because with Kitchener's rest of the schedule, you're thinking you're going to get a lot of London, a lot of Guelph, a lot of 2 teams that are going for it. You get a little bit of the Sioux, which is okay. But then it's just Erie's getting better by the day. It's an interesting time in the Western Conference, but then I think is Mississauga just beating up on 4 other teams that are rebuilding?
No, they're getting a steady diet of Barrie and North Bay.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
you know, and Barrie still doesn't seem to have sorted itself out, but they're definitely not taking themselves out of the conversation for sure.
Matt Guzda, goalie of the week again.
There you go.
Twice now since being in Barrie. His numbers are insane as a Colt.
Anyway, another tip of the cap or a tap of the stick to James Richmond for and sure. Whatever it is he's doing there in Mississauga, because he's got those guys going. And it's nice to see.
Farsi, before we get to our interview, hit us up once more with our sponsor this week.
Yeah, David Schooley. He's an award-winning broker at Remax Twin City. Basically, it comes down to this, right? You're going to get into the real estate market. You got to buy, you got to sell. David takes care of everything that you need, and he makes it easy. Think of him as like the CEO of your moving experience, okay? And once you touch base with him, he's going to be right there with you through every step of the way. So 519-577-1212. 519-577-1212. Online, goinghome.ca. Tell David, Hope and Farwell sent you.
Quick congratulations to former Kingston Canadian and head coach of the Owen Sound Attack, Mike Stuthers, who got his first National Hockey League win the other day. Just like to keep people up to date. His name's came up on this podcast a couple times. I remember the main time was with Mike Fuda when talking about the Attack. So congrats to Mike. To our guest this week, around 30 years covering the Ontario Hockey League. Crazy numbers. Tons of Memorial Cup experience. We get stories about Gretzky. We get stories about Lemieux. Obviously, tons of Ranger stories, Bellows, Stevens, Coffey, Torquia, so on and so forth. Torquia, is that okay to throw him in there?
Yes, please throw him in every chance you get. We love that guy.
So. You're welcome, Torch. Up there with guys whose banners are hanging. Anyway, for David Schooley, here is our interview with Tom Conaway.
Even before we get to covering the Kitchener Rangers and all of the decades you spent doing that, what about sports writing? What attracted you to the newspaper business, and was it always an interest in sports?
Yes, definitely. Well, I just told you that I started out delivering papers, the Record and eventually the Reporter, when I was just a kid. And then in high school, I did a little bit of stringing for the Record, doing local sports. I would go into the office in downtown Preston and teletype it up to the main office, and they paid me 15 cents a column inch. And that was sort of my introduction to it during high school.
They start paying that much, you're never going to leave at 15 cents a column inch, eh?
Well, 6-inch story, 90 cents. Yeah.
What was it like back in the day? I say back in the day, in the early 80s, before I was even around, but what was it like covering an OHL team back then?
Well, we had a lot more time, that's for sure. We didn't have the deadlines to meet like we did later on. I could go to a game and go out for a beer afterwards to the subscribers lounge and then go back to the paper, and I had all kinds of time. But when we got into the computer era, well, things tightened up and the deadlines got tighter and tighter. And towards the end, I mean, it was almost a case of having to file the story within 5 minutes of the game ending. So you dreaded, a last minute change, a late goal that changed the whole story. You had to do some fast maneuvering, So that was the big change for me.
I've always wondered about that, Tom, having never worked to that deadline. But you must, as the game is, maybe 10 minutes left, have a pretty good idea of where your story's going and what everything looks like in order to meet deadline.
Yeah, exactly. And so you would have things all planned out, and you'd have your lead, and then things would change. And you'd have to switch it very quickly. And they wanted you to file that initial story, and then we would have time afterwards to go down to the dressing room to get some color stuff. And then we would throw that into the second edition. So the second story was much better than the first. The first was you always did running copy to make sure you weren't stranded. So as the game was going on, I was doing running copy, and I was constantly restructuring paragraphs and leads. And, sometimes it was hard to concentrate on the game. I always envied your job because you're so involved in the game. but I had to worry about all this other stuff. And it was nerve-wracking. Yeah.
This question may come across weird, but I'm picturing like 1981. Are you sitting in the press box? Do you have a typewriter? Or are you just on your pen and paper? Because obviously you didn't have your laptop.
That's how I'm old school. I always used a pen and paper. I rarely used a recorder because I found it took too much time to unrecord it. And so I always use pen and paper for most of the time. I experimented with a tape recorder at times, but I was more comfortable using pad and pencil. And yeah, we were on the typewriters, I guess, right up until I guess it was the early 80s when the computers came in, and we had to take crash courses at the Record. And I thought, my gosh, am I ever going to learn how this thing operates? But you get used to it, and then when you look back, you wonder how you ever managed on a typewriter, because you're constantly tearing your copy in half and pasting it. And I can remember the '76 Olympics in Montreal, and we had to send our copy back by phone, and it was awful because we didn't have a computer, and so you were on a typewriter, and then the person that you were sending your story to might not know anything about sports, so you had to explain everything. You were just worn to a frazzle by the time the night was over, going through all this. Yeah, things have improved in that regard, that's for sure. Yeah.
What I think back, Tom, to when you first started covering sports for, I guess, what was it then anyway? It's Waterloo Region Record now. Was it the Kitchener-Waterloo Record, the KW Record?
Yeah, it's changed so often. Yeah,
it really has.
The Kitchener Record, yeah.
So
I actually started out with the after I left high school with the Galt Reporter. I worked there for 3 years, and 2 years in advertising, which I didn't like, and then switched to editorial with Carl Fletcher. Have you heard of Carl Fletcher?
Absolutely, yep.
Sports editor, the old sports editor of the Reporter. Great guy, and I think I learned more under him in a year than I would have going to journalism school. He was just a great guy, and he became a lifelong friend.
Yeah, he was a good newspaper man for sure.
He was, yeah.
Can you, Tom, put into perspective why I was wondering about that was what the team meant to the city, 50 years ago at this point, because we certainly remember the most recent, mid to late 90s, where it was a rough period for the Kitchener Rangers. You didn't see a lot of fans in the stands at the auditorium. What was it like when you first started leading into those 3 championship years?
When the first team I ever covered was the 73-74 Rangers. And then the 80-81 was the first Memorial Cup team. So the city was right into the Rangers. Yes, the Rangers were the main beat, that's for sure. I don't think there was any other beat in the paper as important as the Rangers. That is for sure. And the city supported them. Well, you know how they get behind them, and it just got more so and more so as the years went by. And then that last Memorial Cup win in 2003, in the hoopla was incredible. I can remember coming back into the city and the people in the streets, and pulling into the auditorium, and seeing these hundreds of people around the auditorium. And that was an exciting time.
I guess that kind of leads me into my next question, being as it's been a while here in Kitchener. So what was it like covering a Memorial Cup? Because not many people have done that around this part in a while anyway.
Oh, well, my first one actually was here in Kitchener in '75. The Rangers weren't in it. The Marlies represented the OHL. The Kitchener hosted the cup. So I remember covering that one. The Marlies won it. They threw George Armstrong in the pool at one of the local hotels. George Armstrong was the coach. And then I used to go to the Memorial Cup when it was out at town, and the Rangers weren't involved. Sudbury in '78, and in '79 it was in Quebec, in Trois-Rivières, Sherbrooke and Verdun. And then in 81 was Windsor, 82 Hull. And it was really exciting. I love covering it, but it was a lot of work. It was intense because it went on for a week, and you were working every day. And at the end of it, I mean, you enjoyed it while it was going on, but at the end of the week, you were pretty weary. You were glad to get a few days off.
Of the 5 you covered that the Kitchener Rangers appeared in, Tom, 81, 82, 84, 90, and then 03. We've had a number of guests on this podcast already talk about that 90 Memorial Cup as being really the stuff of legend in junior hockey. Would it be the best of the 5 that you saw?
I would say it was probably definitely the most exciting because just the way it ended. The Rangers lost 2 overtime games to Oshawa, and that last game, I can still see the goal. I'm not sure. I think it caromed off somebody. Bill Armstrong shot from the point, and I remember talking to him. He was a stay-at-home defenseman. He'd scored 2 goals all year, and the puck was just inside the blue line, and he had to make a decision. Do I go in and take a quick shot or retreat to the neutral zone? He decided to take the quick shot, and he then turned, and he was skating back to the neutral zone. And he heard the roar of the crowd and thought that he had assisted on the Memorial Cup winning goal. Here he had scored it. And so that was an exciting ending. But yeah, the Rangers, I don't think Joe McDonnell ever got over that loss. He and Armstrong run into each other. Armstrong is the amateur scouting director with St. Louis, and Joe's with Dallas. So their paths cross, I guess, and so Joe always reminds him of what a jerk he was.
Tom, you talked about coming back into the city after that 03 Cup and just everybody waiting at the odd and stuff. What was it like coming back? What was it like coming back into the city after that 90 loss, though?
Well, I wasn't traveling with the team then. I was traveling with the team in 81 and 82, but and in 03 we flew from Breslau on WestJet, but in 90, because it was in Hamilton, I drove back, so I didn't experience the same thing. But I know the team, it was just dreadful, the letdown, because they had come so close. And I felt particularly sorry for Mike Torkia. And I always remember Freddie Braithwaite, the Oshawa goaltender. He rushed down the length of the ice to commiserate with Mike. And I don't know whether they knew each other, whether maybe they had played against each other in minor hockey, but he certainly fell for Mike. And I thought it was a real class act on the part of Freddie Braithwaite. And the thing is with that game, Freddie Braithwaite was a junior B goaltender who had been called up late in the season. He'd hardly seen any action at all. And in that very last game, their regular goaltender, Kevin Butts, got hurt in the second period. And they just threw Freddie in. And he was so calm and cool and made some tremendous saves. And he was one of the reasons why they won that on that Armstrong goal. So those are the things I remember. Yeah. And also Lindros, who was a tremendous player. He was only 17, and you remember he turned down a chance to play in the Sioux. And Oshawa made a big deal with the Sioux. I can't remember all the draft picks and players involved, but they got Lindros for half a season, and he was outstanding. And again in the playoffs, he stood out. The funny thing was in the Memorial Cup, he didn't score a single goal, but he made the All-Star team. He had 0 goals, 9 assists, but he was just an incredible influence on their success.
That's another name that comes up frequently on this podcast when we talk to people who have been around the game for a while, outside of of Lindros, Tom, and it could be the Brian Bellows and the Scott Stevens and the Al McInnes's, but other players that you saw in your time covering the game that really left an indelible impression on you.
In 81 in Windsor, Joe McDonnell had a great Memorial Cup, and he had a wonderful season too. 15 goals, 50 assists. And Joe was the captain to start that season, that 80-81 season. And Orville Tessier took the C away from him because the team was struggling and gave it to Bellows, 16 years old. And Bellows in 81 and then again in 82. I'll never forget how he played. He and in 82, they lost the first game in that tournament 10-4. Things didn't look good at all. But the next game, Bellows got them going right off the bat. He scored within 11 seconds in that second game. They beat Portland 9-2. And then in the final against Sherbrooke, he had 3 goals and 2 assists. And for some reason or other, they gave the most valuable player of the tournament to Sean McKenna of Sherbrooke, and Bellows didn't even make the All-Star team. It was an incredible injustice, but Brian Bellows for sure stands out in that one. Yeah. In 84, well, you had John Tucker and Wayne Presley. They were the 2 big shooters then, and how they ever lost that. They had a great regular season, and they played well in the Memorial Cup, but in fact they beat Ottawa 7-2 in the round robin, and then lost 7-2 in the final to Ottawa that year. And the thing I remember about that is poor Ray LeBlanc, the goaltender. The score was 1-1 in the first period, and Ottawa scored 2 fluke goals, one from the corner of the rink, and the other one by Bruce Cassidy, a defenseman who's the head coach of Boston now. He banked one off the sideboards. LeBlanc came out to block it, and it slipped past him into the open net. And that made it 3-1, and it was game over. That was the end of it. They went on and won 7-2. So it's things like that I remember. I really felt for LeBlanc that night, and then in let's see, what's the next one? Well, 03. That was just an incredible performance. That was a true team effort. 5 of the Rangers made the All-Star team. Dickey in goal, Steve Eminger on defense, and then Derek Roy, who I love to watch play. Saw him play for his entire 4 years. Mike Richards and Greg Campbell. And Greg Campbell, yeah, he would be one that really stood out. And he was basically considered a power forward, a defensive type forward. And Peter DeBoer wanted to strengthen the team that year with some weight and some physical play. So he made a deal with his old Plymouth team, and he sent a real good player, Ramsey, I believe his name Ryan Ramsey. I'm not sure. It was Ramsey anyway. He was a skilled player and a top draft pick. He sent him to Plymouth along with a second round pick, Gary Klapkowski, for Campbell to get his physical part of the game into the Ranger lineup. And what a job Campbell did. He got over 20 goals during the regular season, scored 15 in the playoffs, and made the All-Star team, and won the playoff or the Memorial Cup scoring championship. And he was brought in as a power forward. He wasn't expected to do all that. I think Peter pointed to him, Eminger, and Roy as the 3 people that won that series. So those are the guys I remember. But there was a great supporting cast too. Andre Benoit on defense, he was a great player, and There were so many of them. Dickey was just tremendous in goal.
Peter Kanko, I think he led the tournament goals that
Who's that?
Memorial
Who's
Cup. Peter Kanko.
Peter Kanko. Oh yes,
yeah,
yes.
he led the tournament. I'm curious, in your 30 years of covering the Ontario Hockey League, was that 03 Rangers team the best hockey team you saw?
You know, Peter DeBoer said that he had coached more skilled teams, but he had never coached a team that had the perseverance and the drive of that team. But yeah, I would say that was probably the most skilled. Well, I don't know. No, it's hard to say because in '82, that was a tremendous team in '82.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with Bellows and Larmer and Stevens and McInnes and Wendell Young, and there were so many of them.
You know, it occurs to me, Tom, as we're recounting these championships that you covered, especially early on, 81, 82, 84, and then the end of the 89 calendar year, 89, 90. So 4 essentially in a decade. And then a little over a decade later, that second Memorial Cup is captured. Chris and I have been working together 5 years. A Western Conference final, double overtime loss, pretty exciting. But that's as far as we've gotten together. There must have been a point in time where you're thinking, well, this is the greatest beat on earth. They're always just winning championships, or at least going to them.
Yeah, so for sure, yeah. And you know, the one season that I really enjoyed, it seemed everything happened, was the 78-79 season. The Rangers, they weren't a contending team, but they were a good, solid team. But it seemed that everything happened. They had a bunch of suspensions over a team party where 10 players were suspended. They had a wild second round playoff series with Niagara Falls Flyers, probably the craziest series I ever saw. It went 7 games. In the 5th game, they lost 10-2 down in Niagara, and Bob Ertl, the coach, he got upset with the officiating of Tom Brown. He got tossed, and actually he walked off the bench at the end of the second period, just left the bench, and Mike Penny came down and took over the team. And then with 1 minute left to show up Brown, Penny threw Dave Jennings, the goaltender, out as a forward. It was crazy. And so there were all kinds of suspensions, and both teams had to buy their players back. And Bob Ertl, I think he got 3 games. He said he resigned just so he could criticize the referees. And then he came back and he resumed his position the following year. Mike Penny got fined $200 for sending Jennings out as a forward, and it was wild.
You mentioned a name earlier in Joe McDonnell. You covered him as both a player and as a coach. How did he change in his time within Kitchener?
I admired him as a player. I mentioned that great final season he had, 80-81. That was his final season before going on to play pro. And he didn't play long in the NHL. He was with Vancouver and Pittsburgh, but I think he had back problems, and I think it was injury problems that curtailed his career. And then, of course, he came in as a coach in the late 80s, and then was coach until 95. And he was an intense, fiery guy. I mean, I like Joe, dealing with Joe, but he and I, we didn't see eye to eye at times, and he didn't like to be criticized. He turned on me in Windsor one time and refused to speak to me. And that went on for a while. And I can remember writing a piece saying, look, if Joe ever goes on and coaches in pro ranks, he better develop a thicker skin. He was very sensitive to any kind of criticism, but he was just intense. He wanted his team to win, and things weren't going well at that time in the early 90s. So it was just his reaction. I held nothing against him. I like Joe. He and I I consider him a friend, and we've had many a good chat whenever we bumped into each other. But yeah, he was a very serious guy when he was coaching, that's for sure.
That's always the line you walk, isn't it, Tom? And for anybody that covers a team as closely as Chris and I do today, or any of the other media colleagues we have across the league, it was the same for you. You're with the team all the time. You're expected to create copy after every game, on off days, etc. Was it uncommon to rub a coach the wrong way?
No, that first year that I covered the team, 73, 74, Eddie Bush. I don't know if you've read anything about Eddie.
Oh, he had a short fuse.
Oh, old school coach, I'll tell you. And he banned me from the bus one time, and it didn't last long. But he wasn't going to because he was feuding with Ted Mackey, the president of the team. I think Ted respected Eddie's ability as a coach, but they didn't see eye to eye on how Eddie did things. And I think Eddie was pretty coarse with the players. And so I some of the stuff I was writing about the feud between him and Ted, he didn't like, and so he turned on me and banned me from the bus. And he told me one time, he says, "Look, Tom," he says, "we're all in this together. You're an arm of the team." And that didn't sit too well with me, because when you're covering a team, you are not an arm of the team. And Eddie didn't understand that. He thought that we were all in it together, that I was part of the team. But I liked him. I liked Eddie because he was good copy, and he always made things exciting. And he was a good coach, a good hockey man. And I interviewed him a few years after he left the Rangers, and he had a chance to coach the old Kansas City, I think it was the Kansas City Scouts. And Sid Abel, an old friend of his from his Detroit Red Wing days, asked him to, because Eddie had never coached at that level before. And I think the Scouts won 1 of 20 games. So I phoned Eddie up in Collingwood and asked him what his feelings were about that time. And he says, "I didn't even realize we'd only lost 1 game." That was Eddie. But he was a fun guy to be around, really, most of the time. He sat at the back of the bus, though, Mike. All the other coaches sat at the front of the bus.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
He sat at the back of the bus, and so did we. We sat in front of him, and he would go to sleep, and then he would wake up about 20 miles out of town, light up his pipe, and start yelling at the players. When they turned on the rock music, and he would walk up and down the aisle and get them going. He was a character.
Was that one of the weirdest things you saw on the bus?
What, pardon?
I know bus stories are meant to stay on the bus, but was that one of the weirder things? Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yes. Yeah, that was. Yeah. There weren't that many weird things happening on the bus. The veterans always later on, when the coaching staff moved to the front of the bus, the veterans, of course, always, is it the same way now? They play cards at the back? Yeah.
Nowadays, they all have phones and stuff, so the cards have kind of gone. We don't see too many games of cards, but
I like seeing the cards again because it reminds me of the old days. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm dating myself. Card games, you don't even play card games anymore.
That's how I grew up. It was always card games on the bus.
Yeah. But and then you could always tell the studious ones, they were into the books. That's the one thing that stands out from that 82 Memorial Cup. It was a beautiful warm week in Hull, and the players were doing different things around the hotel and all that. And there was a rookie on the team by the name of Jimmy Quinn, and Jimmy, he was out in the balcony doing his studies. He was always studying, and he played 2 more years with the Rangers, and he was a big part of the '84 team. And then he went on after that to Western, and he became a doctor. And the last time I talked to him, he was an emergency room doctor in Michigan. And that's quite a few years back, but long after he left the Rangers. But I always remember how studious he was. And there were players like that. Others were just kibitzing around. Others were serious students. And they knew they were missing their schoolwork. And so they tried to make up for it on the bus.
Well, speaking of those bus trips, Tom, you and I were chatting just before we went on the air here today about some of the memorable ones for the weather when it was bad. And you, much like many others, were not a fan of that Mackinac Bridge crossing in Sault Ste. Marie.
No, now I can't remember exactly the date of it, but I remember it was a storm and it was blowing and we had to wait on the American side. We always came up the American side, and the bus drivers explained to us they like coming up the American side because there's less chance of running into a moose or deer.
We can attest to that.
Yeah.
So no, we were waiting, and then when the police came and they took us across at, I don't know, 15 kilometers an hour. And as I told you, Mike, I'm sitting at the window looking down at that choppy water, and the guardrail looked about 1 foot high. And I thought, okay, like how long would you last in there? And I can swim a bit, but
You don't want to find out.
I did not like crossing that bridge.
Some
It
things
was
never
okay when
change,
the weather
apparently.
was nice. But and then I told you about when we went to our hotel, the bartender there told us that a Volkswagen had been blown off there only a few weeks earlier. So that only added to my fears. But you know, I mentioned too about the we were talking about the traveling, all the traveling we did. I never, all the hundreds and thousands of miles I put in driving myself, I was never in an accident except once, and it wasn't covering an OHL game. We had started a professional hockey beat in '93, and I was going down to Toronto to the Leaf games all the time. And I was passing the airport, and a big transport came over. I was in his blind spot, and he just nudged the back of my fender and sent me across all 3 lanes at the airport, and not a single car was coming. I couldn't believe my good luck. And I had to turn before I hit the concrete barrier, came right back across to where I had started. I did a big U-turn and stopped, and I was in shock. The coffee I was drinking was all over me. The traffic, I looked in the mirror and the traffic was all lined up behind me. And as soon as they saw I was okay, the guy that hit me in the big white transport truck took off like a shot. And there was no damage to my vehicle. And I went to the Leaf game that night, but I think I was sitting up in the press box there in a state of shock the whole night.
Oh my
Because
goodness.
I was 53 then, and I'm 81 now. I consider all this borrowed time. That was the worst experience I ever had. Yeah, on the road. Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
I can't believe we didn't lead with this question, Farsi, but in your time in covering the Rangers, what was your relationship like with Don Cameron?
Oh, great guy, Don. I got along really well with Don. I didn't room with Don because he always roomed with his color commentators. In the early days, I can't remember everybody who worked with him, but there was Mac McDonald who did the stats at one time. He would go on. Wes Lilly back in the I remember Wes was there in the '81 Memorial Cup, and he was with Don for a long time. And then of course Gary Doyle for years. And we always used to go to Don's room for a few cold ones and a good chit chat. Don always carried a little pack with him, and or we'd hit the bar in the hotel. And but I remember in the '81 Memorial Cup, Don took sick, and he didn't do the final game. I don't know if he missed any others. I know he missed the final game. Bill Inkle filled in for him. He took sick, Don, and I think he had to have some surgery. But that's the only time I remember him missing. But we had some good time. The one time I do remember bunking in with them was up at the Cardinal. Did you ever stay at the Cardinal motel up in Sudbury? That used to be our stopping spot all the time.
Unless it's got a different name now. No offense to the city of Sudbury. I don't think we've had a good hotel any of our trips up there.
Oh, well, we used to stay at the Cardinal, and I got to tell you this story. I call it the Cardinal Caper, and I think I might have been rooming with Don that night. We were sitting out in the lobby, and 3 of the Ranger players knew Dave Staffen, who used to play for the Rangers, and Dave had been traded to Hamilton, and then came back. He came to Sudbury, so they're playing in Sudbury. I think it was a Saturday night. And the coach allowed them to go out and fraternize. And I forget what they did. They went downtown and celebrated a bit, and then they came into the lot of the Cardinal at 2:30 in the morning, and we're still sitting around the lobby. Eddie Bush is sitting around the lobby, and they came in with the horn blaring. You think they'd have a little more sense, but no. And the tires squealing. Well, Eddie, his eyes went like saucers, and he tore out of there, and he confronted these 3 guys in the lobby, and he told me that he was sending them home. So I wrote the story that night, and the next day on the bus over to the Sioux, he came to me and he says, "Can you stop that story?" I said, "No, I can't stop the story, and there's no way that I would have, even if I could have." And he says, "I've decided to play these 3 guys." He wasn't going to send them home at all, so he played them in the Sioux, and the Rangers lost again. The Rangers were in a real funk right then, and I think they wound up getting a $50 fine each when they got home. And Dave Staffen from the Sudbury Wolves apologized to Eddie that he had gotten them into this mess. But I call that the Cardinal Caper. It was kind of fun at the time to watch it all happen.
I always doubt it.
Yeah, it's always better on the outside of those things.
Yeah. But Don, no, I can't say anything more than about Don than that he was just a wonderful guy and a class guy. You could chat with him. He was a great baseball fan. We used to talk baseball a lot, and he was a great student of Scottish history. We discussed Scottish history a lot. The Battle of Culloden and whatnot. Don knew all about it. And he loved poetry too. Yeah, he was an all-round guy.
Oh, he was. It'll be miles to go before I sleep.
You still quote him sometimes in your broadcasts, eh?
Every now and again.
High, wide, and not so handsome.
You got to have those ones in there. Absolutely.
Always.
Yeah.
A couple of players you mentioned earlier, Tom. Wayne Presley, John Tucker, and that 84 team.
Yeah.
That was the team that went on that 25-game heater that is still a CHL record.
That's right.
What do you remember covering? Like, at what point, even as somebody just covering it, does it start to get, like something pretty special is happening here, and you're wondering when it's going to end, and it doesn't until 25 games. What was that experience like? Oh,
it was just sheer excitement, game after game after game. Yeah, you wondered how long it was going to go on, but they had some tremendous players on that team. So it didn't really, 25 games, you don't expect that. But a long winning streak, yeah, no, that was no surprise with that group. They were a good hockey team, and it was unfortunate. Tom Barrett coached that team, and that was his chance to win it all. And I felt badly because Tom he lost his job about 3 or 4 years later, and when the Rangers fell on bad times after that, and of course the 90s weren't too pleasant either. After the 90 Memorial Cup, but no, that long streak, I do remember that, and yeah, Presley and Tucker, just great players, and yeah, good memories.
Back to that 81 Memorial Cup, if I can, real quick, Tom. Dale Howarchuk was part of that Cornwall Royals team.
Oh, yeah.
When you saw him, was he the type of player that you knew right away? Obviously, he was. I think he went second overall, but
yeah, he was just so good. He won the Quebec scoring championship that year, and he signed with Winnipeg, or he was drafted by Winnipeg that year, and along with one of his high scoring teammates, Scott Arneal. He was just exceptional. I mean, the Rangers ran into a real juggernaut there. That's for sure. Good team.
Wasn't there some guy named Mario kicking around in that '84 championship too?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm thinking of a Ranger.
No,
Yes,
sorry.
Indeed. Yes, indeed.
his last name rhymes with Schmilu.
Yeah.
Mario Lemieux, yes, came in 282 points in the Quebec League, and unheard of, 130 goals, and boy, you thought he would just dominate. The Rangers beat them 8-2 in the first game. He didn't get anything. I think he had a goal and assist in the second game, and in the third game he got an assist. So he finished the tournament, 1 goal and 2 assists. Laval went out in 3 games. He didn't do much, but he signed with Pittsburgh right after that. So, yeah.
Just think though, Tom, you saw one of the incredibly rare down times of Mario Lemieux's career.
Yes, yeah, it was a downtime, all right. Yeah.
Yeah, 2 points a game is downtime.
Yeah.
Right?
But I remember you talk about Mario Lemieux. I saw Gretzky when he was 16. He came down with the Sioux Greyhounds, and it was I'll never forget the date, November 13th, 1977. And he came down as a 16-year-old, and he was getting all kinds of publicity. The Rangers beat the Sioux that game 7-5. I watched him intently because he was getting so much publicity, and he was scoring 2-3 points a game. The game before that, he had scored a goal. He had a goal and 3 assists against the Marlies in Toronto. Then they came to Kitchener on the Sunday afternoon. So I'm watching him really closely, and I thought, he doesn't really dominate the game, but he does so many things right, and he moved the puck so well. And at the end of the game, he had a goal and 3 assists. So he had 2 goals and 6 assists in those 2 weekend games. But Bob, what really bugged Bob Ertl in that game? The score was 7-4, and the Sioux scored with 1 second left, and Gretzky did a little dance in front of the net, and that really irritated Bob Ertl. He didn't like that at all. And but I remember going down and talking to him afterwards, and he was just sort of a non-assuming kid, grade 11, great poise. He says, I'm used to all the publicity. He says, it doesn't bother me. And he says, I gotta work on my skating. He says, I'm going to take power skating in the off season. He says, my skating needs improving. And he was also interested in getting into sports. He didn't talk about a pro career. He was talking about becoming an announcer. He was going to do disc jockey work in the Sioux that summer. Well, that was the only year he played in the OHL. The next year he was in the WHA with Indianapolis, and then eventually Edmonton. And then,
Just imagine if he would have got his skating figured out.
Just imagine if he was still a DJ. That would have been something else, eh?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Brian Schnurr was supposed to check him in that game, and he did a really good job for the first part of the game. He held him, but then the Rangers took a big lead, and the Rangers kind of stopped defending him, and that's when Gretzky broke loose. But I remember talking to Brian after the game, and he says, yeah, he's a pretty good player. He says, God, he's got 4 years left, but he didn't. He went to pro the next year. But it's fun to look back and remember chatting with a player of that immense ability.
Yeah, I think even if you talk to Gretzky for 10 seconds, you still tell everyone that you talked to Gretzky at one point, right? Even if you just pass him in a hall.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it was-
Tom, this
that was kind of a, when I look back, that was kind of a highlight.
for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. This league has a long history of legendary coaches: Maverty, Dick Todd, Killer, obviously Templeton. Did you have a favorite coach, whether in Kitchener or around the OHL, that you covered?
Yeah, Brian Kilray. Love Brian Kilray. And I loved going into his man cave after the game, because he had a barrel full of beer. And if you wanted to smoke a cigar, he had a box of cigars, and he would give you all the time in the world. And I remember the Memorial Cup, I guess it was '84, and interviewing him at one of the local hotels. And boy, at the end of that interview, he just had the Molson X's all lined up along the windowsill. Brian knew how to enjoy himself, and I apparently he's 87 now, and is still going strong. Yeah, but I really enjoyed him, and Bert Templeton. He would be probably, looking back, I would say he was the toughest one to deal with, because he had no time for the media. The only time I remember him really breaking loose was during that wild series with Niagara Falls, when he was coaching in Niagara in '79. He and Ertl were jawing back and forth, and boy, you got some great quotes from both of them. But Bert came he came out of his cocoon during that series, and he spoke openly. But most of the time, you couldn't get any. I knocked on the door of his room all the time after a game, but I knew what to expect. He wouldn't say anything. He might talk to you for a while, but you wouldn't have anything that you could use. It was pretty hopeless.
But you were
That's what
determined,
Farwell
Tom.
says when he works with me.
He was, I like, and the funny thing is, I don't dislike any of these guys. I like Bert. I realize he was just a very intense individual, and but looking back, I would have to pick him as the most difficult guy to deal with. Yeah.
You mentioned a moment ago, Tom, how the 90s were, following that Memorial Cup, obviously, with Joe McDonnell, Mike Torchia and company. It was a rough decade. Let's just call it what it is for the Kitchener Rangers organization,
Yeah.
a very proud organization.
Yes.
In retrospect, we can look back and see, obviously, the turnaround when Pete DeBoer and Steve Spott arrived, but covering that, what was it like leading up to that moment? I'm sure there was some, rumbling out there that this was about to happen, but what did it mean at the time?
You mean at the time Peter came in?
Correct.
Well, they finished out of the playoffs 2 of the 3 years prior to Peter coming, and Jamie McDonald was the general manager over those 3 years, and then the Rangers bought out his contract. He was fired, bought out the last 2 years of his contract. I believe that's how it happened. Jamie was here 3 years, missed the playoffs 2 of those years, but made some good draft picks. He made some really good draft picks. And a lot of those guys that he picked, like Roy and Benoit and Richards, they formed the core of the club in '03. And Peter, he just added the finishing touches. Everybody was excited about Peter because he had that reputation coming into town, and yeah, it was an exciting time when he signed. But he did a great job of adding the necessary players, like Dave Clarkson, great addition. Nathan O'Nabagon, George Halkitis on defense, and guys of that, and Gregory Campbell, who I've touched on. Those 4 guys added a lot of physical power to the team, and I think put them over the top. Peter did a great job, but he also had some good young players to work with from the Jamie McDonald era. But it was sure there was a lot of excitement because everybody wanted the Rangers to turn things around, and Peter DeBoer was going to be the man to do it, and he did. Although the first year they had a pretty good record. I think they finished 3rd in their division. That would have been 01-02, Peter's first year. but they went out in the first round to Guelph 4 straight. And I think that really shook Peter up. He realized, hey, I've got to get strength in this team. We're getting beaten in the corners and on the boards. We got to strengthen this team. And he did.
He was the last guy to get it done. We're coming up on 15 years without a OHL championship, 20 years without a Memorial Cup championship.
Yeah.
It's it hasn't been the kindest decade around here now, that's for sure.
No, that's true. Yeah, you don't realize it at the time of what you're facing.
Yeah, and you got to cover 5.
What's that? Oh yeah,
And
that's
you got-
right.
Yeah.
We're jealous, Tom. Can you tell?
Well, it was a great way for me to end my career. I worked two more years beyond that, but I retired in 05. But that Memorial Cup in 03 was sort of my grand hurrah with the Rangers, and it was a good way to end it all.
All right. Before we end this, and Chris asks his inevitable one more question, because he always does that.
Sure.
When you talked about toughness, I couldn't help but think back to, I mean, and we've heard so many stories on this podcast about the way the game was, through the 70s, 80s, even into the 90s. I think of a guy like growing up in Kitchener, Tom, Mike Moore, who I vividly remember Supermaning into the opposition's bench. Like, this guy feared no one. But what were
81 and 82? He had close to 375 minutes in penalty. Both years.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, he was a tough character, Mike. Good player, and I liked him. He added a lot to those 2 Memorial Cup teams in 81 and 82. That's for sure.
Do you remember any games, Tom, where things were just getting so out of hand you'd wondered if they'd, finish actually playing hockey?
You mean
like, brawls or
they would end the game? It was getting totally out of hand.
No, not that they would, but when you're covering this and you see one fight after another, maybe there's a bench clearing brawl, maybe there's a line brawl.
Oh, well, that series in against Niagara in 78-79.
Right.
That was absolutely the wildest thing I ever saw. Yeah, it was just fights and just downright dirty play. Yeah, and then the coaches would got into it, and that was a crazy series. Yeah, but there were so many. We've touched on a lot of players, and there's so many good players that the Rangers had that I haven't even mentioned. Like Paul Reinhardt, what a great player he was, and in that crazy series that I was talking to you about against Niagara in 79, Paul scored 3 goals in 6 minutes or 7 minutes in one game to beat the Falls. Like, he was just a very good player, and of course he proved it at the pro level too. But there's so many of them. Doug Riseborough was a favorite of mine. That team he was on in 73, 74. They might have gone further than what they did. They lost to Peterborough, Roger Nielsen's tough Peterborough team in 74. And Riseborough had hurt his knee at Christmas time and never played again. And that year, and then the following year he turned pro. But the loss of him on that 73-74 team was disastrous to the Rangers. So there's guys like that I hate to end this by not mentioning, because Riseborough was a favorite of mine. So
amazing how you can recall the years these players played. I can't remember 5 years ago. Like, it's amazing.
We're usually counting. It's true, Tom. Like, he was here when, and we start counting. Is he? Yeah, he's an OA now. So he was. Anyway, it's good.
It honestly reminds me of talking to Don.
I don't think I have, but by 45, 50 years is a long time.
It honestly reminds me of talking to Don in the media room all those years, because he'd just rhyme them off. He'd be able to tell you how many points, I don't know, Paul Reinhardt had on December 6th in the 7th. He was amazing.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, for sure he did. Yeah.
My last question, we talked about these 5 Memorial Cups. The first one was in Windsor, then in Hull, here in Kitchener, Hamilton, and then Quebec. The Memorial Cups are known nowadays anyway for some of the fun that's had with media members and people covering the Memorial Cup in some of these cities. Which one of those 5 cities did you have the most fun in?
Most fun. Let's see. I liked Windsor. I think Windsor has a bad reputation. I always liked Windsor. We had a good time in Hull. Hull was, of course, Kitchener in '84. I mean, let's see, Hamilton. I would say Hull and Quebec City. So I'm favoring Quebec here. Yeah, we had a lot of fun in Hull and a lot of fun. You know, the thing I remember, Jeff Hicks and I traveled around a lot. We love Quebec City, and we did a lot of touring. There was a lot of work involved, but we toured the countryside too. Montmorency Falls. I think everybody should see Montmorency Falls outside Quebec. To me, it's almost as spectacular as Niagara. And we did the big island there. I forget the name of it. It's very rural. And Quebec City is like being in Europe. So we did a lot of traveling around Quebec City. We saw every nook and corner, and that was just a fun time. So I would say Quebec City and then Hull.
Good to know. Now I know where I'm planning my next vacation.
Exactly. Absolutely. Tom, I got to say, as a kid growing up in this city, reading your byline every single day on the sports pages, this has been a real treat. So thanks very much for making time to share your stories with us.
Oh, thanks, Mike. And I enjoy your broadcast. I enjoy listening to you and Chris too. So all the best to you too.